Hi guys, it's been a long day. I'm going to try not to bore you too much with this. So, workers and machines of the world unite. The human in the machine meets the machine in the human. You can imagine where the first part of the title comes from. It's my having lived under communism for about 30 years. So, probably if you've known me for a few hours, you'll know that I'm guided by, I shouldn't really say Nietzsche's quote, but it's probably the bad thing to be guided by, but it's this, that you must have chaos within you to create a dancing star. So most of my life has both been chaotic, but very, very rich. And I believe that the way we work with in futures, I tend to work with revolutionary futures, so beyond 20, 30 years, I suppose, mostly. The whole process is a bit crazy. This is actually from a paper I wrote earlier in the year that's been published in the World Futures Journal, in the next one, I think. And really what I want to talk about is literally how we're going to sort of collaborate, I suppose, with machines and what's all that meaning. So one of the things I want to talk about, the post-normal, I'm assuming you're all knowledgeable about the post-normal. You've all read Sandar's 2010 and everything else that's come past that. But if you haven't, you should, because it's sort of critical to the understanding of where we are today, which is this whole idea that we're in an accelerated environment and that we're confused, that it's complex, we're confused. Frequently, we're in chaotic situations, but there's also this accelerated need for very quick answers. And we've seen that, of course, with the pandemic. And that's basically what the post-normal is. I see it as a remix society. And one of the things that I worked on, and I work on in parallel with this whole idea of humans and machines, is this area of anchors, identities, what are archetypes and heroes. So let's just take the heroes bit, since it's easier. Tell me a hero. Who's your hero currently?
Superman.
Well, that's pretty cool. That's him, isn't it? Who's got a hero? Do you have any heroes?
Elon Musk.
See, I knew you'd say that, because actually that's the most common thing to say today. So, it's fairly interesting, right? Because when Jung sort of worked on archetypes and heroes and everything else, they were fundamentally different. We're moving in a very, very different direction of what we actually think heroes are within society. Oh, you want to talk louder? Oh my God, I hate that. I'll burst into song. Anyone else on heroes? Who's got a hero today? A modern hero? See? Oh.
What about
Bono?
Bono?
He was a sort of cool hero at some point. Is he still alive? Is he still singing? So that's on the one hand. That's fundamentally changed, and I don't want to go into a whole debate on that. But when we start to look, even from over the last decade, or if we're certainly projecting forward to the next, we need to understand, even within the human context, it's fine to talk about machines and how they're evolving and everything else, but we change. We change dramatically. We don't really think about it too much. I've just asked you a whole lot of heroes, and they're fundamentally different heroes than they would be certainly 30 or 40 years ago, when anchors were very strict, right? If you look pre the 60s, particularly, when my generation, anchors were pretty typical. Family, religion, and so on. Well, it's pretty hard to describe what a family is for a start, right? We've just added 2 letters to LGBTQ. So we have now 6 letters. So you start thinking about that changes the dynamics of where we're moving, even on the human side. On this side, and if you are interested in all the areas of post-human, you should go to Jose's presentation on Friday about transhumanism. But I did a whole thing on Maslow's in 2004 in a book I wrote on called Future Frequencies. And I actually came to the conclusion that self-actualization was not what we're about. We're going way beyond that. We're going to be able to do things that are much greater than what we believed in ourselves we could achieve. I call that self-extension. Synthetic characters. Half our life now goes through synthetic characters, whether it's agents or avatars or whatever else, and how we see ourselves, right? Who plays games like FIFA? Okay. So you'll know in FIFA, for example, that once you start getting really immersed in it, or any game, I suppose, but particularly that's a really good one because we all know the people are, and they're so much like the characters today as opposed to they were started in 98 or something, that you believe you're them. And you get really pissed. You understand, you forget the fact that you're actually moving those characters. And you start screaming, you should be screaming at yourself, but you're not, you're screaming at Ronaldo. Because it's Ronaldo that's screwed up, not you. So this whole element with synthetic characters and our ability to sort of immerse ourselves into something that isn't us is getting greater and greater as the quality of synthetic characters changes so much. Okay? Thirdly, enhanced emotions. There's been quite a lot of talk today, and you've just seen it with the plants, a lot on that. Actually, a guy called David Coulter, who's a composer, and he used to be with the Pogues and Test Department and just about everything else, but he actually became a composer and has done very well. He always used to ask me, when I finished a project, what was the missing color? And the project actually had nothing to do with that. And I sort of stand there and I'd go, sorry? And he said, yeah, that's all fine. You're working on military stuff. What's the missing color? And I start to sort of think about this whole aspect of why do I see everything simply through these sort of singular emotions that tend to be linked to the job I'm doing? Why can't I take myself out of that and to start asking myself, what's this all really about? What's it doing to me? What's it going to do to other people? And change that aspect. And again, the whole thing of performance enhancers. I mean, I don't want to go into cyborgs and everything else now, but we know, I mean, more and more we're able to improve. You start talking about the military, there's a whole variety of aspects, whether it's from, enhancing from carrying things to staying, awake for the next 48 hours or whatever it happens to be, right? There's so many of them, I don't want to go into it. So there's a lot of things happening to humans in parallel to what we talk about with machines. And I wanted to bring that point up, and I don't want to talk specifically this moment about transhumanism and stuff, but ordinary things, everyday life is not what it was. And we can't begin to think from even today, but if you're thinking 20 or 30 years out, you can't think of humans in the same way as we think about them now. And you have to remember that. Because it's very, very easy to do all your research based on what we are now rather than what we're actually going to be. I want to talk a little about Industry 4.0 because that's obviously critical for this, okay? I don't like the term Industry 4.0. I think it's irrelevant, but since it's used and everyone seems to like it. And there are two or three things here that are important, okay? One of them is, and you all know this, about decentralization. I mean, it's not the obvious one's Uber or something, but there's so many elements to decentralized industry today, and industries and comparative industries. I don't really need to go into them. But this other thing is critical. This shift from decentralization is really making its way into meta-economics. Do you all know what meta-economics is? Some people call it humanized economics. So it's a whole sustainable economics thing, like it's a shift post-neoliberalism into, obviously, the efforts to make us more human, I suppose, in what we're doing. And with that, we're beginning to see, and one of the things that's sort of pushing that very hard is the Japanese system, Human 5.0, or Society 5.0, which is literally shifting to change society very dramatically to be more of a sustainable society, but really driving that through regulation and policy. And we're beginning to see in parallel with that things that make this happen much more easily. So it doesn't just happen because I'm anti-neoliberalism and, a friend of Harvey. No, that's nothing to do with it. It's because we're beginning to build things like nanomanufacturing, that we're actually beginning to have completely new formats of how we collaborate and how we work and within society. And I want to talk a little bit about that. And I want to put some numbers up because everyone loves numbers. And I will say this, numbers are nothing compared to actually what we're really talking about, but we need to talk. So you look down this list, right? These are fairly, and look at the devices, look at the sizes. This is all projections. I don't even work on projections. I don't work with forecasts, okay? But the fact of the matter is, we are living in a very, very different world, and most of the time we're not aware of it. So we talk about these things, right? We talk about IoT, or we talk about situated awareness, or we talk about all those elements, but this is really going on massively. And we wake up one day, and particularly if you're working with smart cities, or if you're working with any, security and things like that, you wake up one day and you realize where this $21.5 billion worth of goods are. They're running our lives. You can take through any of these. Application performance management, growing massively. And I put these things in because a lot of the time we sort of forget the stuff that's happening behind, the stuff that we don't see, okay? This is a world in which we live, but unless you're actually in that field, we never really see it. It's what all the big companies are doing and changing the way that they already operate. But we don't really know. Self-assembly machines, right? So you can put all these things together. And I don't know what the blank one was, but something happened in the transfer. I know what it was. It's to do with AI. But we already start to see smart manufacturing. This was brilliant, wasn't it? The RoRo system. It's fucking amazing. The simplification of that. I live in Rijeka in Croatia. And I see this, like every day pretty well, one part of it. One part sees the seaside, it's beautiful. And the other side sees a port. The functionality of this is so simple. And we're seeing more and more of this. And as we begin to see distribution networks fundamentally bringing together, if you think of things like nano manufacturing, new distribution systems, intelligent distribution systems, intelligent transportation systems, you can begin to see that change. Accelerated build, shape-shifting. These are all, I'm just showing you these because they're all things that are happening. And quite honestly, they just set a scene as to why we're not going to be working literally on our own in the future. We can't. That's the point. The top one there, the Ocean City, is a project now that's happening. $21 billion being invested in Japan into this. It is an energy development city below the water. Okay? We're looking for new ways of doing things. These are massive. There's real money going into these things. And they change, and one day they come up, right? Some things happen, some things don't. I've been waiting for fuel cells since 1985, since Ballard sort of actually developed them. And so, well, wrong way. So what's critical here to understand is that we cannot simply think about the future or the way we're going to the future based on who we are and how we sit within this situation. Now, the girls, Francesca, Alexandra, and actually talked specifically about this whole beyond human, and I fundamentally support that. I think we are moving away from a purely human-centric society. I don't know that I want to be completely the other end of that, but at least to give consideration to it's important. And why is it important? Because I believe that to actually make that happen, we're going to have to go to HMR, and that we will not be talking in the future about HR, about human resources, but human-machine resources. And I'll explain why I think that as we go through. So one of them is about transdisciplinarity. What you see here are 5, let's call them technology clusters, that on their own are incredibly exciting, okay? Incredibly exciting, we know. Nano for energy, in temperature control, the things we have, all the bio stuff that's happening. Robot, we know. Quanto, anyone seen the latest quantum machine from China, the quantum computer? Amazing. We all thought we'd won with Google and everything else 3 years ago, miles behind. China's actually building transdisciplinary universities and transdisciplinary production facilities. bringing together these technologies. Very dangerous, because together, when you start to put genetics together with robotics, you can have some problems. And there's some of the things we talk about, like killer bots and stuff like that, right? But look at what we got here. Self-directed and created intelligent tools and cognitive machinery and cybernetic organisms. Does anyone know what that is at the top? I know that Ryan does, but let's just put it like this. It's as big as my finger. It's actually smaller than my finger now. And it's weaponized. Okay? A cluster of those, very interesting. 3 birds on an electricity line, very interesting. Of course, they're not birds, and they're really dangerous. What's this? It's a molecular machine. It has automatic precision, and it can assemble itself. Now, in some of the arenas that we were talking about today, that's a pretty potent tool. I don't want to go into that side of it, but it's very potent for manufacturing as well. I talked about quantum computing and communications and cryptology. The top bit is the bit we talk about every day, right? Robotic automation, it's everywhere. Okay? So you look at all that, and what do you get? You get this feeling, because we're told, and the question is it going to cause job erosion or job creation? Because you look at it and you think to yourself, oh my God, is that all that happening? None of that looks like I'm involved. Of course we are, but it doesn't sort of look at it. And what we see is, and we know because there's all this stuff that comes out. You've all read it. You know, McKinsey, everybody show, Forrester, 6% in 21 is going to happen. It's all going to fall down. You know, 32% of all jobs are going to be lost. You know, reams and reams and reams of these projections. But I'll say this. Between 2010 and 2020, and I'm old, right? So I remember when the computer came in, and I said there was going to be no jobs for me. Here I am still, 50 years later, working my arse off, 20 hours a day, right? Look at these jobs. None of these jobs existed in 2010. Well, they did in labs and stuff, but not in real life. Okay? And you could put another 100 jobs on there. It's the way life is. So when you start to look forward, oh, look at this. Stanza in that brilliant shot. It has so many functions. And the future workforce, look at these jobs. Anyone fancy doing any of them? Who wants to be a biochem IID specialist? Or someone who works in civil defense, right? A drone fleet aggregator. Can you think back 5 years to when before we even talked about drones? Literally. About 5 years ago. And what did they look like at the beginning? Your kids had them, didn't they? They had one, it wasn't 5 years ago, 7 or 8 years ago. And they fly them over the dog park and piss you off. That's what we thought of drones at that moment in time. 2 years later, your packages were arriving by drones, right? Now we talk about drone fleets. I need people to run these damn things. And you can go through any job. There's hundreds of them, right? Who's going to design all this IoT and CPS? We can talk about all this thing, but these are jobs. These are things that people are going to have to do now. 5 years from now, these will be normal jobs. And I can put up a list in 2030, and we'll all say the same thing. What the impact it has most of all is not so much on whether there are jobs and people to be employed, it's what type of people, how we're going to educate people. We're miles behind. My whole task at the university is to bring in transdisciplinary courses. And they hate it because the physicists want to do physics. They don't want to learn about philosophy. They don't want to learn about what's happening on biology unless they're working on batteries or something, But we need it. For all these jobs, we're going to need a very, very different perspective on how we learn, what we learn from very, very early age. And if we can't cope with that, there won't be any jobs. because we need people for different things. So these skills, someone I think showed some skills. These are my skills. I mean, I call them post-normal skills, but they were based on Siemens originally and typical things that you all know. And other than things like, I don't know, rhizomatic thinking and stuff like that, they're all the same. They're not much different to anyone else's. 2 or 3 in, 2 or 3 out. You know, we all think they're the skills we should be learning. But look at the hours worked. And look what type of jobs and how many hours are spent at work. So you look here and you begin to understand where the growth is, and you begin to understand where the drop-off is, right? So it's right. We're really losing on non-creative skills, and we're really gaining where you need really good technology skills. And that's fine for everyone in this room, of which 80% have doctorates. But maybe it's not so good for the average individual who doesn't know what nanotechnology even, not what it means, it's a different comment, but what it actually, how you spell it, right? And the point is, he's going to kill me for this. I stole another one of his fabulous pictures. We've got 3 areas for this, right? Increasing human augmentation interfaces, collective and open intelligence, and particularly collective AI intelligence, which is a massive area, and multi-agent machine cognition and emotions. Now, why do I say that? If you look at anything to do, I actually got in here about, I probably do somewhere. If you go from the side about this multi-agent machine cognition and emotion, one of the critical things is here, where do we stand on emotional computing, and where do we stand on emotional robots, right? Because that's all the critical things. Basically, most robots, lab-based robots, can do about 80-something% of what we can do. There's some problems, actually, certain walking problems in terms of, well, they're hip problems, actually, I think. Well, I mean, we all have them, don't we? It's normal. Why wouldn't robots have them? But, you know, in a sense, part of that is because most things, you know, the intelligence part's fine, you know, the reasoning, all this stuff, that's all okay. But they lack emotions and abstract thinking and stuff like that, in the main, right? There are bits and pieces they can do, but a lot of it they can't do. And so we still see them as a helper. Well, I'm looking 20 years out, or whatever it's be. I have to look beyond the fact that they're a helper and that they have an equal position with us. And I want to talk about that. Oh, why do I keep going back? I don't want to go back, guys. So I'm going to talk about the machine in the human, first of all. Augmented human capabilities. Look at all these things. Neurorobotics, bioengineering, molecular nanotech, mind-to-mind. Does anyone believe in mind-to-mind? Who's your hero?
Elon Musk, Neuralink.
That's it, exactly that. They just built a massive factory in Brownsville, Texas. And Elon himself just moved to Austin. Why? Because they have all the capabilities there, and they've made incredible progress in mind-to-mind. If you're working, for example, and you're thinking about how policing is going to change and things like that, do you think you're really going to have fingerprinting 5, 10 years from now? No, you're going to have brain printing. You're going to have neuroprinting. Why? Because you want to show intent. Far too many of the crimes today we can't prove, because particularly cyber crimes, because we don't understand the intent, right, which is a critical part of it. It's very easy to prove someone did something, but do they intend to do it, which is a massive issue, right? So we're seeing these changes, right? So we're seeing these augmented human capabilities with a whole host of things. And I don't want to talk about, see, transhumans, but this is all for him on Friday. It's my setup. You know, there's 2 days to hear about it. And, sorry, it's going on fantastically. And there's these embodied agents, right? Situational, which we talk about all the time with IoT and all this sort of stuff. Autonomous agents, which we begin to work with already, particularly in AI. Adaptable agents, social agents. Social agents are with us all the time, right? They're the thing that recommend what we read and what we listen to and, you know, our Spotify preferences and all that stuff, right? So we're moving from this way of going from the symbiotic through neural networks to the hybrid systems. And this comes into everything, even cryptology. And you go to the other side of that, the human in the machine, what do you get? Well, first of all, we get these new environments, CPS as we call it, which are cyber-physical systems and their architectures. We're seeing augmentation and optimization of human capabilities. This is critical, right? Because it's critical that we move along with these machines. We don't just want to see machines becoming incredibly brilliant and self-generating AI and all this stuff. We want to see us also moving in the same direction. Otherwise, the whole issue of dominance shifts. We got to shift. So one of the things that I look at is intelligent assets. I talked about HMR, right? So how do you normally decide what you do with your assets? Well, you work on the value of those assets, right? So I want to show you, talk about this. And there's these areas, right, of the economics of recognition. We all understand, or we try to understand our value. That's why we ask for raises occasionally, right? But what about machines? What about when you add something to a machine that fundamentally changes that function? That asset shifts. So we've got to understand that, and this whole idea of new currencies of knowledge. We already have them. In everything that we begin to do, where we're actually using even data analytics, there's a new currency to that knowledge. We pay more or we pay less, or we treat that knowledge in a very, very different way. The speed of gaining that knowledge, the type of knowledge, the system that that knowledge can bring, how that system can be augmented to bring a different type of knowledge, what's the next phase on using that knowledge. That changes how we see knowledge. And it will change how we teach knowledge. Because ultimately, the values of that knowledge will be very different, the currencies of that knowledge. What do you think the currency of studying philosophy is today? What do you think? I mean, what would you do? What are you going to do with your kids? I mean, some of you have kids, right? So this is a big question. My kids are all grown up, so I don't care. They're all rock stars and stuff, so it doesn't really matter. I didn't do a very good job. They're too sex, drugs, and rock and roll for all this conversation. But notwithstanding that, what would you tell them? What language would you tell them to learn? Would you tell them to learn AI or German? The Germans all go German. Everyone else goes, thank you, AI, right? I mean, seriously, these are questions, these are things that you've got to decide as you move forward. And those are these new currencies of knowledge. They have new values to them. So we start to go through this, and I wanted to talk about the robots in particular, because what we're actually seeing with robots are these massive shifts, right? And they're all individual at the moment pretty well. So Sophie, the most boring robot in the world, right? Only because we all talk about it the whole time. She can make eye contact, and she's now a Saudi Arabia citizen. So what? I'm a UAE citizen. Do I go around saying it all the time? No, of course not. Does that matter? Does that change who I am? No, not really. Nina, she can do continuous learning through thought and images. Fuhat, does anyone know all these? Well, you probably do. All these various robots, they're all doing different things. They're amazing. Put them all together, guys. If only the universities worked together on these, we'd actually find some pretty crazy robots. At the moment, they're all sort of individual, right? Luckily for us. Sweats. Look at this one. Kengura actually sweat. Oh, he's terrible. What else? A sweaty robot. I slept with a sweaty robot last night. Well done. That must have been brilliant. So, what is important is that we understand these assets. And we understand through HMR what the capabilities and allocation of these assets can be. Right? It's critical. So first of all, does the machine have a job description? You all have a job description. Probably has nothing to do with the job you're doing, but you have a job description, right? Okay? More or less. So breaking the conventional schema of what a job description is sort of critical. You're not going to write the job description for the machine the way you wrote it previously for a human, but that shifts how we think about ourselves. in that interaction, right? That's critical. Active and dynamic allocation. How do you allocate them? Well, there's a thing over here, right? The hierarchy model of functional allocation. You use the same thing. How efficient, how effective, how efficient they are. How do you allocate the functions between the humans? These are assets, guys. These are intelligent assets. That's why we have incredible data systems. But up until now, we just see them as data systems pushing our function. But in fact, there comes a point where you have to make a decision. Do I put 20 million into that data system, or do I have 20 more people? Well, up until now, and that's particularly relevant at the point where there's a big economic issue of what we do with people. Yeah, so these are big stories. So there are these programs to deal with this, and I'll talk a little more about it. Role configuration. Optimizing what we do, optimizing what the robot does, and more importantly, optimizing what we can do together. That's the critical thing, right? And at the moment, we're still looking at construction industry, brilliant, because we've now got mobile robots for the first time. Big problem. Well, it's the same in the military, right? Because now you're in the field, you're in a field with mobile robots, which is a little different when we actually just sort of sent them where we wanted to send them. Now they're actually running around. It's a little more complicated because we need to understand a lot of things on spatial and so on and so forth. Different. Economic, ethical, and policy control of functions. One of the biggest problems with all this, particularly AI and robots particularly, I mean, robots is a funny word to use. I mean machines. I mean, a machine's anything, right? Machine's not, a robot happens to be one of them, but it's also a piece of AI. It's a piece of nothing, at the end of the day, but of software. Cultural identity, adaptability, inclusion. Where are they in all this? Are they just a piece of code? Now, the girls talked about nature. There's going to be a lot of people fighting to give machines some form of representation. So what I did, I built up this thing on looking at that thing on effectiveness, efficiency, stewardship, and costs, and began to sort of plan, actually for a client specifically, how that client could look at the allocation of intelligent assets. Because and I'm not going to go through all these, there's too many of them. What's the environmental damage that it does? Time to completion, intelligibility factor. And intelligibility or mutual intelligibility, is how well do we work together? If you're going to employ machines, and you know this from the military, if I'm going to put military machines into the military in a battlefield situation, I mean, it's pure from a scenario, you may make sure they're not in the way and they're not messing up, and that they can interrelate and talk to one another, right? I mean, that's normal. And so that mutual intelligibility is critical here. How much does the machine understand me, just as much as I understand what the machine's trying to do? And this is actually in the mind as much as the reality, because we've got to accept that they're going to be there. Stanza's going to talk tomorrow, right, Stanza? About a lot of the aspects on machines and security, but from a very, very, very different angle. But, I mean, there's so much meaning to all that behind just the word machine, right? That's the issue. I'm trying to pull that out. And the reason I call them intelligent assets is that you stop thinking about them as a machine and that you start to think about them as something much more than that, something that has some strengths to it. And the same on this, we're going to kinetic workplaces. Well, actually, kinetic workplace is sort of an interesting term. It was a sort of a term that started, 10 years back when we talked about adaptive industries and so on and so forth. Now kinetic workplaces are sort of like, well, I had an office. The last one I went to the office. It's not even there anymore. It's been turned into something, a workshop or something. I go, well, it's okay. You just move the wall, don't you? And anyway, a machine's behind the other side of the wall, so too bad. And there's this whole thing now of shifting, of understanding spatial behavior and team cognition between humans and machines. Or augmented human and machines, right, as we've been talking, or transhumans and machines, or cyborgs and machines, which are different. Seamless security. Hey guys, this doesn't just happen. You start putting machines into the workforce, you better really understand what the security thing is. IoT, we all talk about IoT as though it's just like IoT, something happens, right? IoT, yeah, put some IoT into the smart city. Going to have some adaptive buildings, and they're all going to interact and communicate with one another. The world's going to be amazing. Do you know that for every piece of IoT, there's a massive issue that is based, well, first of all, there are 3 layers to it, and all those layers can be attacked. Each layer independently. Until we have seamless security on each part of the IoT, well, say goodbye, because you're going to have IoT hackers, and they're going to be damn good. And so all your ideas about how we fuel things in the future won't work quite as well, or the interaction between buildings, or the interaction on security and so on. And you can go through all this, and I don't want to bore you with it, and so the last thing on that point I wanted to talk about is this issue of culture and trust. When you think about a machine, do you trust it? When I mean machine, I can mean all the things I talked about. Do you trust an agent? Do you trust well, I trust them actually probably more than humans at the moment, because humans are pretty untrustworthy. Does the machine give you fake news? Sure does, right? AI gives you fake news every day. How do you deal with that? So we're in a different world, guys. Now, you can put an ethical black box to it, right, to make sure it doesn't sort of, not going to happen, is it? You can program morality to it. That works pretty well, doesn't it? We don't even know what morality is. I could ask every person in this room, they'd have a completely different version of what morality is. We haven't a clue anymore. 50 years ago, we might have sort of known a little bit about it. But now we don't really know. And every culture has a different morality. And so all this is critical to this conversation. It's really easy to throw things out there, and that's the reason I did this, that we all talk about every single day. Situational awareness, IoT, security. We just throw words, we chat about this all the time. And you're at a meeting and they go, oh, do you know what? I'd really like you to actually program an IoT system for my smart city. And I go, what the fuck are you talking about? Seriously, guys. You know where you're coming from? Well, the boss said IoT is really happening in 2023. He read the McKinsey report, Oh, shit, okay. Seriously. So there are things that we're beginning to do, and there's some stuff up here that's sort of interesting. This thing about the policy prism, the new paradigms, the new possibilities. But you've got to start to think really differently. Because if you don't, all those things with that slide where it was said, where there's going to be like 45% less jobs and 35% less jobs and whatever else it said, it'd probably be true. Because we'd be too dumb to work within that environment. And that's sad. But there's hundreds of millions of variables of all this, right? So, I made a joke this morning about superhumans. But the reality is, there's a lot more happening out there, and he'll tell you all about that, than we think there is. Okay? At the moment, over the past 40 years, we've had 84 cognitive architectures towards AGI. 84. 49 of them are still being used in about 1,000 programs. I think that's the latest. Okay? This is not as silly as we all think. We all think this is never going to happen. But there's a lot. It could be accentuated a lot faster than we think it could happen. And that's part of the issue. And 2045, and you and I know each other for a very long time. So we've seen the shifts. We've seen maybe a 10-year, but these gaps are not changing that dramatically. It's not like we're saying suddenly 2145, because there's a lot happening. And when you see these things here, these higher level mentalities, are human intelligence. That's what we're supposed to have. Okay? How fast do you think we can begin to build machines that have some of those qualities, a lot of those qualities? Not all in one go. So my mate here, who guides me through life because he's more intelligent than I am, actually is telling me that I need to re-educate myself and upskill myself in a slightly different way. It's one of the friends from my university, from my department, actually. And I will leave you with this, that if we're to make a point for ourselves, if we as an asset are going to be greater, we better start thinking about what we really are good at. And I don't mean professional skills, that's a totally different thing. I mean, we can all be good at certain professions. But think about this stuff, self-reliance, morality and civic engagement and citizenship and all the stuff that actually has nothing to do or seems like nothing to do with what I'm talking about. And yet they're all the things that make us human, right? They're the things that this conference, it's a pretty good turnout. First conference. How many people in this room have been to an in-person conference? Well, you have recent, like last week or something, but until then. In the last few months, presumably. Yeah, I mean, one out of a, whatever there are, 40 in the room or something, right? And we love it because we can all be a bit silly and we can hug people who we haven't seen for years and talk to people who we like and walk up to people we fancy and all the stuff that we want to do, right? How we live our lives, all the crazy stuff we do. I mean, yeah, it's all really nice sitting in a room all day and working on your computer and teaching people on screen. That's all fun, right? It's all nice. But that's not what we really want to do. We want the other bit, right, as well. We want that blended life. And so, to me, we've got to understand how we can live and how we can actually start to respect machines. And I go back to what they said, beyond human. I don't think we can be that human-centric. I mean, I think we need to be human-centric in general, but I don't think we can be so human-centric that we forget those value assets, those intelligent assets that we're going to have to work with. And I'll leave you with that. And thank you. What more can I say?
Okay. Thank you very much, Derek. I think these are not just researches, but you could see that they're pet topics. You know, how much you are involved and we are involved in that. As I promised, of course, I think we just raised our son and we can just put a comma, not a full stop, to the end of these presentations. So if you have questions and notes, I'm sure that we have to share, right? You wanted to say?
Yeah, well, congratulate the organizers for this session. Very interesting, beginning with Tamás giving an interesting view with young people, then the Italians, and closing with you. And as you know, I am a transhumanist, a singularitarian, and an immortalist, and I will be talking about this on Friday in this same room at 11:30. So I think
During my presentation, you saw it.
Yes.
I said it 3 times.
Yes, of course. I have been here all the time. I have been listening and watching, and I think it is fantastic all that you have talked about. And I will talk about rejuvenation technologies also. So that is a personal interest of everybody, I think. So anyway, no comments. I just loved it. Thank you so much, Derek.
Okay. Thank you, Jose. Anyway, yeah. Okay. Yeah. And I'm coming there. Yes.
Okay, thank you, Tomasz, for a very good presentation, and thank you, Derek, and thank you, girls. You all contributed a lot to what we already know and what we what we don't know yet what is coming towards us. I have a question to Tomasz. You mentioned in your presentation a quite interesting notion that the younger generation do not want to work for money anymore. They want to work for joy or to help other people, other citizens, let's put it like this. This goes in lines with our recent findings about millennials, and it goes along with another finding from Aaron Horst and his concept of purpose economy. Probably you could speculate a little bit about it. If we are not GDP driven in the future, what will drive our economy? Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, you can call it a notion, but I think if you recall our youth, I mean, when we were young children, I mean, just because we are young still, this motivation also still exists. So I think when we were thinking about, okay, what to do later on, the main motivation was, just joy or maybe help other, but not the money. So I think it is very much age determined, which will change, or no, which used to change throughout the time. I don't know what will happen with this generation, but it's good to know that basically let's say the starting motivation or the main motivation behind the profession, work, or contribution to the society, it's basically not money. So it's very much let's say, culturally determined, which may change. And I hope so, that it will. Yeah. Okay, let's see what's...
Thinking about the human-machine relationship, I wonder, and you mentioned that, of course, that there is also a machine or will be machines in the human. And I think this is a much nearer future perspective that I would see, that we all consist more and more of replacement parts that improve our abilities, or improve our brain, make us faster, make us understand languages without learning them.